Hello, church. This is part 2 or part 5, depending on how you're counting, of this video series we're doing on the three offices of Christ being the true prophet, the true priest, and the true king. If you watched the last video, we took some time to sort of define what a priest is and what that office of priest consisted of, the role of a priest. What we're going to do in this video is look at a case study of a priest in the Old Testament. In particular, we're looking at the life of Aaron. And we're going to be looking at 3 scenes that we get with Aaron in the Old Testament to sort of look at what is a priest that God has called, that God has instituted into the office. What does he do in the life of the people? If you remember from the last video, we looked at 3 functions of what a priest does, that they're representatives of man to God, that they are spiritually responsible for the people, and that they offer sacrifices for sin. And so as we look at the life of Aaron briefly here in a few quick sketches, I want to sort of have these rolling around in our mind. In what ways is Aaron fulfilling these responsibilities? In what ways does Aaron fall short? Again, as we saw with Elijah the prophet, the priests that God calls are not perfect priests, and that's why they ultimately point forward to our need for a perfect high priest, and we're certainly going to see that in these 3 scenes in the life of Aaron. Let's jump right in. The first scene that we see with Aaron is his calling to be a priest. Again, we saw in the last video that priests don't nominate themselves, and when they try to do that, bad things happen. We'll see that in this video. But that God ultimately calls those who will serve him as priests. That's what he does here in Exodus 28. This is God speaking to Moses. Then bring near to you Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the people of Israel to serve me as priests. And then going on, talking about the role that Aaron will play, Exodus 29, it shall be a regular burnt offering throughout your generations at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, where I will meet with you to speak to you there. There I will meet with the people of Israel, and it shall be sanctified by my glory. I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar. Aaron also and his sons I will consecrate to serve me as priests. I will dwell among the people of Israel and will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. So what we see here is Aaron being called and then starting to fulfill those functions of what a priest does. Those jobs that a priest would represent as they represent man to God. That's scene 1, the calling of Aaron. Let's jump here to scene 2. The next 2 scenes we're going to get with Aaron, pretty good stories, pretty fascinating to study what's happening in these texts. And I would encourage you to study these passages more. One you'll be familiar with, the other one you may not be as familiar with. There's a lot for us to learn from these passages. We could spend additional videos talking about just what's going on in these Bible passages. And so I would encourage you to study them more on your own. The second one here is the story of the golden calf that we get in Exodus 32. And what we're going to read here is really a picture of human failure. It's going to be a picture of the humanness and the sinfulness of Aaron coming through as he's seeking to fulfill his duty as a priest. But let's read here. I think we're going to read the first 10 verses of Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron, their representative, and said to him, Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Again, the people have an innate sense that they need to worship something. They don't know where Moses has gone. He's receiving the 10 Commandments up the mountain. And so they have a desire to create gods for themselves. You know, Calvin said the human heart is an idol factory. And that's what's happening right here. The people have just an innate desire because of their brokenness to have something to worship. And they go to Aaron, their representative, to do that for them. So Aaron said to them, Take off the rings of gold that are in your ears, of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I command them. They made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you.'" Really fascinating scene there. We see that the people are grumbling, they're upset, and they're willing to sacrifice their God, the actual God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, in order to have this physical thing in front of them that they can see and touch and really control and create in their own image. We do that today, don't we? As a side note, we often desire to make gods for ourselves that are in our own image rather than the God of the Bible that the Bible speaks the truth about. We see that Aaron is very complicit here in making the golden calf. It's his idea to collect the gold from the people. He's the one who fashions it out of the gold. He's the one who sets up the monument the altar that they are going to worship. And so later he'll tell Moses that it was sort of the people's idea, but similar to what's true in our own culture today, the people get the leaders they deserve. And so Aaron really is a representative of the people here, in that he is complicit in making this golden calf that the people are going to worship. Later in Exodus 32, verse 30, we see Moses confront the people. "The next day Moses said to the people, 'You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin.'" What's interesting there is, even though Aaron is the high priest that God has installed, we see Moses here acting like a priest, don't we? He is going to go up and make atonement for the sins of the people. That's what a priest does. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." So really what Moses is doing here is he's willing to sacrifice himself for the good of the people. He's saying, I'll stand in this gap as the mediator, the representative for the people. Take me, not them, essentially. But the Lord said to Moses, "Whosoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. So again, we see a picture there of human failure, of a priest, Aaron, not doing his duty, and Moses fulfilling the role of a priest, seeking to be the mediator between the people and God, seeking to sacrifice himself so that the people can be made right with God. The final scene here with Moses and Aaron that we're going to pick up is later in Numbers 16. Really the entire chapter. We're not going to read the whole chapter for the sake of time. I would encourage you to do it. It's a wild story. There's a lot that's going on. We're going to pick up in verse 41. Let me summarize verses 1 through 40 for you. The heading here is Korah's rebellion. Really, there's this sort of lower priest on the totem pole named Korah, and he's got some friends with him, and they are rebelling against Moses and Aaron. Basically, they're saying, all of us priests should be on the same level. Aaron, why are you higher up and more influential, more in leadership than we are? Aren't we all priests? Shouldn't we all be on the same level of authority? Why do you set yourself up over against us? And Moses and Aaron are saying, we didn't do this. God did this. God called Aaron to be the high priest over the other priests, over the people. And then there's this sort of back and forth, similar to Elijah and the showdown with the prophets of Baal. Here we have Moses and Aaron in a showdown with the priests. The difference is these are all God's people, Israelites, who are having this disagreement and this discussion. As you read those verses, there's a lot of back and forth. Moses pleading with the people to repent and to trust God and all of this. And what happens at the end is that there's this huge earthquake. And this actually happens here. I'm looking at the Bible on my phone here. Verse 31, let me just read to you what happens. As soon as he finished saying this, the ground under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, that is Korah, and their household, and all those associated with Korah, together with their possessions. They went down alive into the realm of the dead, with everything they owned. The earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. At their cries, all the Israelites around them fled, shouting, "The earth is going to swallow us too." And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense, the counter offering that we read about in that chapter. And so really what's happening there is, again, a showdown. Who is the true priest? Is it Aaron, who God has installed, or is it these sons of Levi, Korah, who have sort of instituted themselves as priests on the same level with Aaron? It's not even a battle, it's over in an instant. All of the instigators are dealt with this earthquake thing that comes and swallows them up. But then there's a second part to this scene, and that is all of the people who were sort of following Korah and supported this grassroots egalitarian style of priesthood, who were challenging, why do we have one great high priest in Aaron and not all of these priests that we have? Why are they not all on the same page? Here's what we pick up in verse 41. Again, what we see here, similar to when they made the golden calf, it's people who are grumbling. They don't trust Aaron. They don't trust the leadership that God has put into place. Here's what happens. But on the next day, all of the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation has assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came up to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces, and Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put fire on it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them." Keyword, for wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun. So what's happening? God has to punish sin. These people are sinning against him, and so this plague has gone out among all of these people. So Aaron took it as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague was stopped. Again, this is a crazy story, right? There's a lot of things going on here. God's justice, God's holiness, the people not trusting Christ, the people not trusting Aaron and Moses. But what we're acutely interested in here in this video is, what does a priest do, right? And how does Aaron fulfill that role of the priest in the midst of God's people? And the reason I'm sharing this story, one, is because it's a pretty fascinating story, and I think it's one of the lesser known tales of the Bible. But verse 48 here that's on the screen, right in the middle of your screen, is a picture of what a priest does. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. So picture what's happening here. This plague is going out among the people. People are getting sick and dying. Aaron runs out holding this censer as the mediator between man and God. And as he gets to the point where the plague is spreading, and anyone who is behind him is saved because he's made atonement for them. And anyone who's not perishes because their sins have not been forgiven. God's anger has not been propitiated, if you remember in the last video. God's anger has not been satisfied towards them. And so really, quite fundamentally, what we see here is a picture of a priest standing in the gap between man and God and pleading man's case to God. And God, because he is good and just and merciful, anyone who the priest has made atonement for is saved alive. We don't get that number here of how many are saved. But that's what the role of the priest does, to make atonement for sin, to be the representative of the people and to spiritually care for the people. That's what Moses and Aaron are doing here in these sketches. Again, I'd encourage you to go back, study these passages more, the golden calf episode and this episode with Korah's rebellion. What I want us to see here is a couple things. One, what does a priest actually do in the life of God's people in the Old Testament? But also, what we see with the golden calf story, how the high priest can fall short, how Aaron is not a perfect high priest. And the reason that that's important is because these are pictures that are causing us to desire, causing God's people to desire a true, perfect high priest who would fulfill all of those roles of the office perfectly in a way that Aaron just couldn't. Similar to how Elijah was a powerful prophet of God, but just wasn't a perfect prophet. Aaron isn't a perfect priest. What that does, what these stories do, is they anticipate that arrival of the one true perfect high priest who would fulfill that office in a way that they couldn't. That's what we're going to do in the next video. We're going to look at Jesus Christ as our one true perfect high priest, to see how he fulfills that role and to ultimately see why that's important for us and why he is worthy of our glory, our honor, and our praise because of that. Thanks. We'll see you then.